Started, Katie, I would love to just know a little bit about, your career journey. How did you kind of get to where you are now, and what kind of lessons did you maybe learn along the way that we might be able to share with students that are on a similar path?
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, Imran. I really appreciate it. I would say my career path has been really interesting. I have been at HTS actually for 18 years, so quite some time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because obviously my training is as a teacher. So I am a certified teacher. I've also like before I ended up going to Teachers College, I did get my master's degree in history.
Oh,
So
cool.
at one point, I thought that I was going to be a professor at a university or work in a museum. And then I took a year off before I went to Teachers College, just to kind of think about what is it exactly that I wanted to do. And I thought, I will try teaching. I will go to Teachers College. I'll never be at a loss for education. It's always great to learn. And then I really loved it. And right out of Teachers College, actually, I was hired on Labor Day weekend. So
Oh,
really just before school started at HTS on an LTO contract as a history and English teacher. And for the first part of my career, that was mainly my focus was a classroom teacher. And then when the pandemic hit, there was some openings in leadership that I just felt like I was in a place within myself to have confidence, to be able to step into those roles. I really love working with students. I love working with students, and I like to listen to their ideas, to their perspectives, and in what ways do they think that they can improve their educational experience, and bringing that voice to conversations in leadership. And that really inspired me to step into those leadership roles. At first, I was the department head. So over the past 4 years, I've been in four different roles.
oh,
So because of like different aspects of leave or like people needed to have somebody to step into that position. So first I was a co-head of English. Then I was in modern languages, even though I don't speak, which is very interesting, any other language other than English.
oh,
Um, so I was coming at that from a perspective of like systems wide change.
gotcha.
So I didn't have the expertise, but I did it in languages, but I did in other areas. And then I stepped into global studies as a department head in a more permanent role. That was the thought. But then our director of experiential learning went on a leave with his family to Greece. And so I thought, it's always something I've been really interested in. I'm going to ask if it's, can I give this a shot to get more experience in different areas of leadership? And so I did. And that's led me to the work that I'm doing right now around internship, which is grounded in academics in many ways, but also really grounded in experiences that are authentic for students. So not really seeing them as separate, but a different branch to the leadership that I've done in the past, which was really like in the academic realm, but supporting some of the equity and diversity initiatives that our students have done throughout our school. So that's where I am now, currently in a role that is working primarily with internship, but also other opportunities for authentic learning that are supported by what the work that we do in our classroom, but also an extension of that.
Well, thank you for sharing I know the Coles Note version of your story there, Katie, because when you hear you've been at one place for 18 years, you might think, oh, you've been doing the same thing, but that's so much change
So
for a
change.
very short period of time. So I think it's probably insightful for people to hear that you might be at this company, but there's all these different opportunities within them to grow and try different things. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when people hear that I've been at the same place for so long, and even when I came into HTS under a different headship, it was really interesting. The head at the time said, really, you shouldn't be in one place for more than 5 years because otherwise you'll stagnate in your career. And that truly has not been my experience. I'm lucky to have leadership that is at the helm of HTS that's very supportive, that is also, I think, really open to people trying new things and encouraging of doing that. And also, I think I found my place when the current leadership came to be like at HTS, that they were really supportive of compassionate leadership. And that's when I also found a place in leadership that I don't think I would have seen myself in before. So although the core of like our organization has always been really grounded in community, and that's one of the reasons why I've stayed, really like what drives our organization forward has evolved and changed, which really has made it feel like I have been in kind of three different
Yeah.
places, three different schools, if that makes sense. So, and I think as I like grew in comfort and confidence in myself, I was able to step into different things that I didn't ever think that I could do, because I felt so supported.
Well, that actually partly answers one of the other questions I had where you mentioned, teaching modern languages, but not necessarily, at face value, feeling like you might have had the expertise. I think a lot of people, they don't pursue an opportunity because they feel like, oh, I don't have the perfect set of skills for it. But, it sounds like being around the right people and the right leadership kind of gave you some confidence. Is there anything else that you could speak to around kind of jumping into an opportunity like that that I think many people would have kind of held back from, even though, you've clearly been successful at it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that's something that I'm trying to do in my current role with our internship program at HTS, which really helps prepare students for opportunities in the future. I think we are working in the workplace is evolving so much, it's so dynamic. The global context is changing and becoming far more complex than I think we may have imagined, when we were going to university and thinking about our potential careers. Really, I think it's about core competencies that we can develop as individuals. And this is what we are trying to encourage in our program with our students as well, is how can we have competencies that we know are like rooted in research that companies and organizations are looking for, so that we can be dynamic as our potential roles evolve. Like even if we are in a role that we step into and we're confident in that skill set that we've had training, for example, in the languages, that might change and evolve over time based on the needs of the organization, the needs of the client, and the people that we work in the service of. So what is the constant, right? The constant is that skill set. And I think really the ability, for me at least, the skill set that I think that I bring to the table, I think a lot, which is kind of like a commonly used phrase, but like outside of the box, thinking, looking at patterns and trends over time, and seeing sort of commonalities that maybe other people may not always be able to see. I think that one of the things that I brought to that role as like head of modern languages as well was like a willingness to be in conversations where, because I feel compassionate leadership is so valuable, I really see the benefit of that, that there is an openness. I'm not coming to that conversation knowing everything. I'm coming from a stance of asking questions for better understanding. But I think also like being able to foster an environment where there's safety to be vulnerable, because if we can't have conversations with our colleagues where we can be in that space where there's a sense of vulnerability, where we can talk about what the issues are openly, we can think about the barriers that we haven't yet been able to overcome to move like the vision of our organization forward in the best interest, in this case, of our students. If we can't sit in that space, I think to have that discussion, then really what we're doing is kind of applying a Band-Aid solution without actually resolving the underlying issues. And so that was sort of the fresh perspective. Also, like it's great because yes, I don't have like this the ties to how things were done before in that program per se. So we can still maintain some of the really important pieces, but what do we need to do? Not because it's the way things have always been done. What do we need to do so that we can move things forward in a way that's in the best interest of all of our shareholders in that circumstance, especially our students, right? Which is the reason why we're here.
That's such a good point. I think one that people will resonate with is that, yeah, you might not know, or you might not be part of the way things have always been done. You can learn that, but then to bring that fresh perspective in is what moves things forward. So that's a great thing to hear, Katie. Thanks for sharing that. Um, One other question I have, just based on the story you told, was you initially kind of talked about maybe being interested in pursuing like work in a museum or
Mhm.
kind of using that history background. And I think a lot of people, early in their careers have that vision for this is the thing I want to do,
Yes.
and might miss out on some of these other great opportunities that present themselves along the way. So, what was it that made you go, oh, yeah, I've been thinking about wanting to work in a museum, but maybe teaching is something I should check out. Like what encouraged you to explore this, newer
Mhm.
option that maybe you hadn't thought of before?
Yeah, I think really what sparked that, I like school. I like
Okay.
learning. This is why I stayed in school,
Fair
literally.
enough.
And I think at first, really, I just didn't know, honestly, what else to do. So I went to teachers college and took the classes. It really wasn't, and I thought, oh, I'll enjoy like engaging in the academic discourse because I love to talk and hear other people's perspectives.
Cool.
Um, but I think really what made me fall in love with teaching as a vocation, where it was truly the connections with the students. So as soon as I did my placement with kids in a classroom, I thought, like, this is for me. I loved that connection. I love advocating for the needs of the students. There's like a deep passion that I have for that, that part I would do for free. So the passion, I think, like that deep passion that is like a purpose that wasn't really sparked until I actually had that lived experience.
That's really cool.
Um, so I think that's really crucial. Like, I think the more opportunities that people can engage in, whether or not that's opportunities that we set up for students in our programming in education for them to engage in authentic opportunities of actually doing and like living the problems and thinking them through um, and having conversations, negotiating, working through like real issues is so important because sometimes you just don't know until you live it.
Yeah.
And I think that is like even true of the role that I am doing now. When I stepped into this role, because the program that we're creating, the internship program is so new. I have like 18 years of institutional knowledge at HTS, so I have an idea of like many different aspects, right? That I could say, oh yes, I know what this like job entails because I've seen, so and so live this, and I've
True.
seen enact that in the community for a long time. But that was not the case of the internship because it was so new. Things were rolling out last year. Um, but living it has been a very different thing. And living it, I think, being motivated by the people that I am in the service of, right? So I feel like I'm in the service of my students. What can I do is best for like our organizational goals, because I firmly believe in them, but also what's best for the student. That's like the motivator. Pushed me to do things that I didn't think I was capable of, or I didn't know how to do, but I knew that that was sort of like what was behind me, moving me forward. And I've surprised myself. And that is a really cool thing. I've surprised myself by the things that I've been able to do. And so I think like just trying to think about sometimes jumping in, like having the background, having the support if you're surrounded by people that are supportive. Knowing the pieces that you are good at, right? What are the things that are skill sets that you can really do well, and having confidence in those things. But I think being in the mindset of, even if you're unsure, um, being in the mindset of seeing something as an adventure and how can you draw on the skills that you already have to as transferable skills to move those pieces forward, and then let your passion propel you, if you will.
That's so cool, Katie. I like that. Give yourself a chance to surprise yourself is a really cool concept, and it's so true. It doesn't happen unless you put yourself into a new situation and give yourself a chance to make some of those discoveries. Uh,
Mhm.
the next kind of question I have is kind of around internships and what you've noticed work for students, trying to get into a career that they're interested in. And I know most of your students are early in that journey because they're in high school. Um, but what we're trying to figure out here is what kind of things can we advise students to do? How can we give them an edge? And I think, HTS sets them up, of course,
Mhm.
naturally through the internship program, but maybe for like students at large that might want to eventually end up working in a museum or in a school. And if they don't have like as robust an internship program as HTS, say, for
Mhm.
instance, what have you noticed kind of gives you an advantage in the workforce today? Like, how can you get yourself, how can you make progress? How can you find some of these opportunities? Do you have any insights on that? Maybe that's a tough question, but yeah, what are some ways students can go about
Mhm.
finding or making opportunities for themselves to get some experience or exposure to the jobs they're interested in?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I think there are a couple of different ways that that can happen. I know that most of our students start very early in involving themselves in opportunities within HTS specifically, so within like our four walls. And then often, so like leadership opportunities through clubs or conversations with administration about initiatives that they hope to run. Even small things like making announcements in our assemblies, in our chapel, that are club-related initiatives that they have become involved in. Building that sort of baseline and that confidence up by starting with very small things will help them to build the confidence I think that they need to be in any workplace. So that is super crucial. And then what usually happens with our students is they have that kind of like basis because we encourage them to be as involved as possible in our student life programming, which exists, I think, in every school for young people, but
Hmm.
also thinking about opportunities to volunteer in the field that you're interested in. Because I was an English teacher for so long, and often English teachers are highly involved in looking at applications for universities, reviewing and providing reference letters for students as they move into post-secondary.
Uh,
One of the things that really sets people up, I think students apart when they're applying for their career pathways through post-secondary, is not their grades. And that's becoming more and more true in an age of generative AI, when we know that, it's sometimes a little bit easier to navigate academic situations depending on how that situation is set up by the classroom teacher and what checkpoints they have in place.
100%.
Um, it's more about like their experiences, not so much like their academic experiences, although those do matter. But what opportunities have they taken again to lead clubs like in the school setting, but also volunteer experience? I think that's so crucial. As you know, we have like a 40-hour requirement by the Ministry of Education to complete that as a mandatory component of graduation across Ontario. I think really encouraging our students not to in our young people, really not to see that as an experience that you need to kind of like get through to cross that off your list, but try to put that as much as possible in alignment with the career pathway that you're hoping to pursue. That I think is so important. And I know many of our students who have done that. I think I've spoken to you about the student in the past. One student they work with very closely who's highly involved in our EDI related clubs. What she has done is really take those opportunities to engage in some pretty stellar volunteer related components that she's been working on many different facets. So she has taken opportunities that were presented not only through our school, like through our, how we kind of like put out information to our students to join these opportunities. But also one thing that she does, which I think is fabulous, great idea, is she's old enough now to have a LinkedIn account. And
Ah,
what she's done through LinkedIn is actually look at people and their pathways and some of the volunteer opportunities that they've taken to be successful in their current fields. She's looked at their trajectories, done some research on people that she really admires, not just from like their career perspective, but also from like an ethical and a moral stance as like people, as global citizens. And she's thought about how she position herself to be able to access some of those same or similar opportunities, which has led her, to work with amazing organizations. Like she's working as youth advisor for the United Nations, specifically working with people who are identified as refugees. So, and that's just one component that she's doing. And she's kind of built that through the networks, but starting off like at her level in the school, thinking about like opportunities to volunteer. And then again, like looking at LinkedIn profiles and continuing to build her portfolio. And really that's based on volunteer work outside of the classroom.
that's amazing. And just another great example of what that type of, you know, effort can yield and in an area that she's interested in too. So I think you put it really well. I feel like the mentality around doing your community service when I was in high school was it's something you have to get done. I wish someone had reframed it for me and, put it
Yeah.
as, hey, this is an opportunity to experience something you might be interested in afterwards. That's such a good point. Because like you're saying, right, all these new opportunities come from that and all this confidence comes from that. So I think it's well worth encouraging people to put a little extra thought into what they end up doing with that
Hmm.
opportunity, really.
Yeah. And I think, those opportunities beget more opportunities, right? As you grow your network. And I think this conversation is such a great example of that. I was introduced to you by Stephanie
Yeah.
Stevens, who works at HTS, and think about like how that partnership has grown and it has given us other opportunities to work together and to support each other's work. And I think that's just so fabulous. It's a great example of how our students can build their network as well through these conversations, and you just never know where those things will lead.
It's so true. It's funny you say that. And it came from an unlikely place, right? It came from a family friend of mine, introduced me to Stephanie. Stephanie introduced me to you. I introduced Stephanie to one of my friends. They ended up being a mentor for the drone project. It really does create an interesting web, when you take just that step into the unknown. Um, and it kind of leads me just to the last question I have for you, Katie, here. As we think about the opportunities that students may end up having, in this sort of future of work, are any emerging fields coming to mind? Like, do you see any exciting new trends, or do you have any predictions on what
Mhm.
kind of opportunities might be worth keeping an eye on or are coming?
Yes, that's such a great question. I mean, even like thinking about, I know a hot topic would be probably generative AI,
Yeah.
which is like everybody's talking about it, right? Because it sort of unsettled our perception of education. A lot of teachers really see it as sort of like a watershed moment, like a turning point in education, and some don't want to think about it. They don't want to address it because it's so big and it's so different, and what will it lead to? But I think the interesting point in my mind is, you have new careers that are being created around generative AI, that are making, an income of like $300,000 a year. And the job really for companies in that context is asking generative AI the right questions,
Uh,
which is fascinating to me.
yeah,
I think it comes back full circle to some of our earlier points, where it's not specifically about having a very like specific specialization, right?
right.
It's about being able to ask the right questions in the right way and being able to understand how to research a topic and come up with solutions that might be new. I think that what is also really important is not having a specific specialization that's very siloed. So looking at things from interdisciplinary perspectives, I think will be so important as we move forward. When we're only thinking about problems that are incredibly complex, like take climate change, for example. How awesome would it be if you had somebody, if you're working on that problem in your company or organization or part of a government initiative, that not only had a perspective that's science-based, but also maybe was able to bring a lens of traditional Indigenous practices and how have they approached that problem in the past and continue to be good stewards of the land, not seeing themselves as separate of the land, right, but as part of it. It's those perspectives from multiple lenses that I think are going to be so crucial in the future moving forward to solve some pretty big problems that we'll be grappling with.
Yeah, and you gave me a really interesting point to kind of think about as well, where you said, it's not as much, of course, grades are important, but these experiences are becoming more and more important because generative AI is going to be harder to detect in kind of traditionally graded work. So it kind of merges this last thought you shared with me here around being able to ask good questions, of a system. I have a feeling that the more experiences you end up having, the better your questions will become, and ultimately, the maybe the more impactful role you'll be able to play in this new future of work. So it brings a lot of things together for me there, Katie. And just thank you so much for your time sharing these insights and stories. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, same here. I always do. And it's amazing to see, of course, HTS continue to grow and your work spread to students to give them some of these opportunities. So, yeah, we're lucky to have the opportunity to work with you and your team.
No, likewise. Thank you so much, Imran. This is great.